Has the issue been resolved? In the Lin clan's living room, Lin Xiao looked at the returning Lin Dong, smiled, and asked. Lin Dong nodded, then briefly recounted the events that had occurred with the Great Wilderness Monument. Hearing about the powerful alien demon within the Great Wilderness Monument, Lin Xiao's expression shifted, and he sighed inwardly, nodding in acknowledgement. If it hadn't been for Lin Dong, this might have turned into a catastrophe. Dad, I've been out for a while now. Tomorrow, I might need to head back to the Dao Sect. Lin Dong handed a jade token to Lin Xiao and said, if any problems arise, crush the jade token, and I'll come immediately. It had been some time since he'd left, and it was time to return to the Dao Sect. Moreover, he could feel his essence spirit within the ancestral stone gradually recovering. It seemed that when it awakened, it would likely wish to see the Dao Sect. Lin Xiao took the jade token, nodded, and then smiled. By the way, you should go visit Miss Qingzhu. You brought her back to our family and then disappeared for over 10 days. It's rather impolite. Lin Dong looked at Lin Xiao's mischievous smile and could only shake his head helplessly. He had thought the matter would be resolved quickly, but it had dragged on much longer than expected. After leaving the living room, Lin Dong headed straight to the backyard, where he saw Ling Qingzhu conversing with Lu Yin. When she noticed his arrival, she merely glanced at him briefly before turning her gaze away. Heh, Donger, you're back, Lu Yin said with a smile, patted Lin Dong on the shoulder, gave a subtle look towards Ling Qingzhu, and then walked away with a grin. Lin Dong gave a wry smile and walked toward Ling Qingzhu. Ling Qingzhu gently waved her long sleeves, her beautiful eyes slightly lowered as she softly spoke. I'll be returning to the Nine Heavens Taiching Palace tomorrow. Although her tone was still calm, Lin Dong could sense a faint trace of irritation. It seemed that Ling Qingzhu had felt uneasy being brought to the Lin family. And during this time, Lin Dong had disappeared without any notice, which no doubt left her feeling awkward and upset. However, her nature was gentle, and she had smiled and interacted courteously with Lu Yin and the elders of the Lin family, hiding her discomfort. Still, it was inevitable that she would feel a little upset about Lin Dong's sudden disappearance without any word. You brought me here, and then you just disappear. What does that mean? She seemed to silently wonder. Lin Dong quickly grabbed her sleeve, smiling awkwardly. It was my fault. I thought the problem would be resolved quickly, but I didn't expect it to drag on this long. As he spoke, his eyes lingered on her beautiful face. I encountered the 9th Demon King from the demon prison. The 9th Demon King? Ling Qingzhu's expression changed. Having faced the 7th Demon King before, she understood the terrifying nature of these alien demons named after the Demon Kings. Even when they teamed up, they hadn't been able to gain an advantage against the 7th Demon King. Now, Lin Dong had encountered the 9th Demon King alone? Are you all right? She asked, her brows furrowing slightly, her clear eyes filled with concern. I'm fine. That guy's strength was greatly reduced due to the seal, but he still fought me for several days and nights. Lin Dong shifted his gaze and, with a grin, began exaggerating the battle with the 9th Demon King, describing it as if he had barely survived a life-and-death struggle. However, his dramatic recounting seemed to have little effect on Ling Qingzhu, whose face remained as calm as ever. She didn't react at all, even as Lin Dong spun his tail. Seeing that his efforts were in vain, Lin Dong could only give up and stop speaking. Smart women were truly difficult to deal with. Ling Qingzhu noticed that he had grown quieter, and, when she saw his frustrated expression, her red lips curled slightly. Her gaze softened. Although Lin Dong had exaggerated, facing the 9th Demon King and engaging in such a battle was indeed inevitable. If you do this again next time, I won't come. Lin Dong, who had been somewhat vexed, froze when he heard the voice suddenly come from the side. He chuckled awkwardly and nodded. Don't worry, next time I'll bring you along. He secretly let out a sigh of relief. At least he had managed to pass that awkward moment. Are you heading back tomorrow? Lin Dong asked, changing the subject. Ling Qingzhu nodded lightly. I've been away for quite a while now. As the palace master, although there are many elders maintaining the order in the palace, I can't stay away forever. All right, I'll be heading back to the Dao Sect tomorrow as well. I'll escort you back to the Nine Heavens Taiching Palace. Lindong said with a nod. When I return, I'll enter seclusion to study the reincarnation. I may not come out for a while, Qingzhu said, looking at Lindong. As for the supreme perception technique, you need to meditate on it more. The way you perceive it now is still not from your own understanding. You're only touching the threshold. Lindong paused for a moment, then looked at Qingzhu with a complicated expression. She had indeed known the true purpose behind his practice of the supreme perception technique. Qingzhu avoided his gaze and spoke while turning to leave the courtyard. You've been busy for a while. Rest for now. However, as she turned, a large hand suddenly grasped her delicate, jade-like wrist. The warmth from the hand made her body shudder, and she instinctively tried to pull away. But the strength in the hand prevented her from escaping. A trace of panic flashed across her usually cold, beautiful face. What are you doing, ah? The next moment, a force pulled her toward a solid chest, and her slender waist was tightly embraced by two strong arms. Thank you. Before she could struggle, a soft voice, tinged with apology, reached her ear. Qingzhu's body froze for a moment as she stood there, her face flushed with embarrassment. She didn't know how to react. Had it been anyone else, she would have drawn her sword and split them in half by now, but in front of this person, she couldn't bring herself to strike. She could only bite her lip lightly, allowing him to continue his forwardness. But Lindong didn't go any further. He simply held her in his arms, trying to alleviate the guilt he felt inside. The courtyard was quiet. After a long while, a graceful figure appeared at the entrance. She immediately noticed the two figures in the embrace and pouted her lips, deliberately making a light hum. Her soft voice shattered the silence, and Qingzhu snapped back to her senses. She glared at Lindong in annoyance, her gaze full of charm, causing Lindong's heart to tremble. Before he could say anything, Qingzhu had already fled, and her usual cold demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Lindong cleared his throat, looking awkwardly at the pouting Qingtan at the door. He forced a smile. Qingtan walked up to Lindong's side, casting a sidelong glance toward Qingzhu's retreating figure. Lindong, I remember there's also a girl from Dao Sect, Huan, right? You're doing this. Lindong immediately felt a headache. This girl really knew how to bring up the most awkward topics. He reached out and rubbed Qingtan's little head, saying, Adults' business is none of your concern, kid. I'm the Dark Hall Master. I'm not a kid anymore. Qingtan huffed, clearly displeased. Lindong chuckled and flicked her smooth forehead with his finger. Lindong, are you going to Dao Sect tomorrow? Qingtan suddenly wrapped her arms around his, grinning broadly. Lindong nodded. Looking at her, he figured she must have heard about it from Lin Xiao. I'm going too. No, stay at home and keep your parents company. My parents agreed. No way. Then I'll send a message with my essence spirit to Huan, telling her about what you just did. Are you asking for a beating? The next day, Lindong looked at Qingtan's cheerful smile behind him and couldn't help but shake his head. He had finally witnessed her persistence firsthand. Beside him, Qingzhu stood elegantly, smiling as she conversed with Lu Yin, who had come to see them off. Father, mother, we'll be leaving now, Lindong said as he glanced at the time and smiled at Lin Xiao and Lu Yin. Be careful, Lin Xiao and Lu Yin both nodded. Lindong was no longer the young boy he once was, and they knew that his accomplishments were enough to make them proud. Lindong smiled in response and then waved his sleeve. In an instant, the three of them turned into streams of light and disappeared into the distance. After leaving the Dian dynasty, Lindong first escorted Qingzhu to the Nine Heavens Taiching Palace. After some time spent there, the palace had been further improved, and after a brief stop, they bid farewell and headed straight for the Dao Sect. In less than half a day, the Dao Sect's mountain range came into view. Lindong's gaze swept over it, and his figure paused for a moment. He noticed a graceful figure sitting on a cliff far off in the distance. Her ice-blue hair cascaded down, exuding a chilling aura that caused the ground around her to freeze solid. Huan. Lindong was taken aback when he saw the familiar figure. He immediately accelerated and flew toward her. She sensed his return, and her icy blue eyes rippled with waves of emotion. "You're back?" Huan stood up, a smile blooming on her delicate face. "What are you doing here?" Lindong asked, smiling. "Waiting for you," Huan replied, her slender fingers tucking a strand of her ice blue hair behind her ear. Her voice was soft, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lindong was stunned. He gazed at her beautiful face and her ice blue eyes, like sapphire, clear and deep. Compared to before, she seemed a little quieter now. He vaguely sensed something was off, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. "With your current state, how can you run around like this?" Lindong sighed lightly, extended his hand toward her, and said, "Let's go back first." Huan nodded slightly, smiling gently. Her delicate, cool hand grasped Lindong's, and as she felt the warmth of his palm, it seemed to stir something in her cold heart. The smile at the corners of her lips grew softer. "Is that really you, Huan?" Qingtan, who was walking beside Lindong, looked at Huan, who had changed so much since they last met, and was a bit stunned. "What happened to you?" "Don't ask nonsense." Lindong patted Qingtan's head, then pulled her up, leading the way toward the Dao Sect. As they entered, Lindong's gaze shifted to a distant peak, where he gave a subtle nod, as if silently expressing his gratitude. The Flame Lord stood there, watching the trio enter the Dao Sect. His expression was complex, and he let out a soft sigh. Inside the Dao Sect, Lindong walked ahead, while Qingtan and Huan stayed close behind. The two women had known each other for some time and had once joined forces to fight against Yuansong, so their relationship was quite good. Now that they reunited, there was a sense of everything having changed. On their way back, they encountered many Dao Sect disciples. When they saw Lindong returning, joy lit up their faces, and from afar, there were enthusiastic calls. Lindong smiled gently at the younger disciples who had only recently joined. In their eyes, he could see a burning determination. This kind of faith, if the Dao Sect ever faced a calamity like the great wilderness sects, might keep their spirit strong and protect the Dao Sect for years to come. The trio ascended to the main peak. Before the main hall, EngSubs and a group of Dao Sect elders were already there. Upon seeing Lindong return, smiles spread across their faces. Although the Eastern Mystery Region's wars had subsided, it was only when Lindong was present that the entire Dao Sect's morale could truly come together. Lindong bowed respectfully to EngSubs. After a brief conversation, he paused and said, "Sect Master, Brother Zhou Tong should be able to come out now." Upon hearing this, EngSubs' expression grew more complicated. He nodded lightly, and the other elders cast their gazes toward him. Before Lindong appeared, Zhou Tong had been the previous legend of the Dao Sect. If he had been able to continue cultivating peacefully within the sect, he might have become the sect master by now. Lindong's palm gently closed, and a soft white light radiated from it. The ancestral stone appeared, and with a flick of his finger, a beam of light shot out from it. The light gradually coalesced, and finally, in front of everyone's gaze, it formed the figure of a man in black robes, Zhou Tong. Zhou Tong slowly opened his tightly shut eyes and, upon seeing EngSubs and the others in front of him, he froze momentarily. His expression grew complex, and his lips slightly trembled. Finally, he knelt down slowly, his voice raspy as it echoed in the hall. "Master, your disciple has returned." EngSubs trembled at these words. Even his usually composed face showed signs of uncontrollable emotion. He stepped forward slowly, gently stroking Zhou Tong's head, his eyes brimming with moisture as he spoke softly, "It's good you're back. Good that you've returned." The surrounding elders sighed quietly, all knowing the suffering Zhou Tong had endured over the years. Once the Dao Sect's legend, he had almost fallen into Yuanman's hands, used as a tool to fight against their own sect. "Back then, I was too reckless, too impulsive, and didn't listen to Master's advice. That's why I fell into this calamity," Zhou Tong said, looking at the moist eyes of EngSubs. Even someone as strong-willed as him couldn't hold back his tears. "Heh, what young person hasn't been impulsive?" EngSubs smiled gently, then fell silent for a moment. "As long as you don't blame me for being too weak to avenge you." As the sect master, You had to think of the sect as a whole. Zhou Tong shook his head. From the very beginning, he had never blamed EngShuanzi in the slightest. Just like Lindong once did, they understood EngShuanzi. Sometimes, making the decision that appeared weak actually required more courage than fighting with one's life. EngShuanzi wiped his tear-streaked eyes, and then, turning to the vast Dao Sect, his voice suddenly rang out, echoing throughout the entire sect. My disciple, the Dao Sect as a whole welcomes you back. His voice traveled far and wide, and countless Dao Sect disciples turned their gaze to the main peak. They paused for a moment, then their faces lit up with surprise. That's... Although many of the new disciples were unfamiliar with the name, they could sense the excitement on the faces of the older generation, and soon, an earth-shattering cheer erupted. Senior brother Zhou Tong, welcome back, Lindong said with a slight smile, gazing at the bustling Dao Sect and the red-eyed Zhou Tong. Zhou Tong stood up, looking at the Dao Sect before him, his face also breaking into an excited smile. He then cupped his fists toward Lindong and said, Junior brother Lindong, thank you so much this time. Had it not been for Lindong using the ancestral stone to protect his essence spirit and nourish it, he would have likely already vanished into thin air. Lindong smiled and shook his head, extending his hand again. Silver light flickered in his palm, and the space ancestral talisman materialized. Now that senior brother Zhou Tong has recovered, the space ancestral talisman should be returned to its rightful owner. Zhou Tong stared at the space ancestral talisman for a moment, then glanced at Lindong, who smiled sincerely, his eyes showing no trace of greed for the talisman. After a brief pause, Zhou Tong slowly extended his hand to take the space ancestral talisman. His gaze remained on the talisman, filled with complexity. Finally, he seemed to chuckle softly, tracing his finger across the surface. A faint bloodline appeared on the talisman, which he then gently broke with a single touch. Crack. The bloodline shattered quietly, and Zhou Tong's face turned pale in an instant. He gently caressed the space ancestral talisman and whispered, Sorry for letting you endure the demonic aura with me all these years, but I believe the next master will be a better fit. The space ancestral talisman radiated glowing circles of light, and a faint humming sound seemed to emanate from it, carrying a sense of reluctance. Senior brother Zhou Tong? Lindong stared blankly at the scene. As the current master of the talisman, he knew exactly what Zhou Tong had done. He had severed his connection to the talisman, a severance that had clearly inflicted a heavy blow on him. Even his essence spirit had weakened significantly at this moment. Junior brother Lindong, as the master of the ancestral talisman, you should be aware of the coming tribulations in this world. I believe the space ancestral talisman is better suited to you than to me, Zhou Tong said with a faint smile, extending the talisman to Lindong once more. I can sense that it feels the same. Lindong's expression was complicated as he stared at the shimmering space ancestral talisman, letting out a soft sigh. Before he could respond, a cool jade hand gently grasped his. He turned his head and saw EngShuanzi's charming face. She spoke softly, This is the choice of both the space ancestral talisman and senior brother Zhou Tong. Lindong forced a smile and nodded, extending his hand to take the talisman. Senior brother Zhou Tong, I won't let it gather dust. I will bear the responsibility of being its master. Buzz. A faint light radiated from the space ancestral talisman, which seemed to flow like liquid into Lindong's palm. At that moment, he could feel an ancient and pure power ripple through his body. The devouring ancestral talisman and thunder ancestral talisman also released waves of energy, instinctively resisting the presence of the space ancestral talisman. However, the ancestral stone suddenly emitted a gentle glow, and under its radiance, the resistance between the talismans quietly faded. Silver light rippled outward from Lindong's body, causing the surrounding space to ripple violently, as if disturbed by a heavy wind. Junior brother Lindong, the space ancestral talisman has recognized you. Now, you must quickly master it, Zhou Tong said, smiling as he watched the talisman integrate into Lindong's body. Lindong nodded. He could feel the speed at which his primordial energy was expanding, and the calm in his heart began to stir with ripples. With the space ancestral talisman in his possession, he could finally begin his serious pursuit of the reincarnation stage. Lindong turned around, asking Ing Huan to look after Qingtan, and then he wasted no time. His figure moved, appearing atop a nearby mountain where he sat down in meditation. Now, he needed to fully refine and master the space ancestral talisman. Brilliant silver light continuously radiated from his body, like a silver sun, drawing the gazes of countless Dao Sect disciples. Seeing Lindong enter a state of cultivation, Ing Huan raised her hand, and the cold air around the mountain peak coalesced into an ice shield, protecting him within. It looks like he's going to attempt the reincarnation stage breakthrough, Ing Xuanzi and the others remarked, immediately noticing Lindong's intentions. Junior brother Lindong's talent surpasses mine. With him in our Dao Sect, we are destined to thrive for generations. Zhou Tong nodded in agreement. He couldn't help but admire Lindong's current accomplishments. Even he had been thoroughly convinced of Lindong's strength after that decisive battle outside the Yuan Gate. Now, let's quietly wait, Ing Xuanzi said with a faint smile. If Lindong could step into the reincarnation stage, he would ascend to the pinnacle of this world. At that point, those who could surpass him would likely be few and far between. Stupid Lindong, leaving me behind again. Qingtan pouted, feigning annoyance. Ing Huan pulled her close with a laugh. Let me take care of you in his place. Hearing this, Qingtan smiled sweetly. Her big eyes gazed toward the distant mountain peak, a trace of bittersweet emotion flickering within them. Just being able to watch you like this is enough for me. Far away, atop another peak, the Flame Lord directed his gaze toward Lindong's mountain. With his hands clasped behind his back, he murmured softly, 3 ancestral talismans already. Lindong, you truly are extraordinary to have achieved this. But still, if you want to surpass little junior sister, let's see if you truly have what it takes. A vast, torrential surge of primordial energy flooded Lindong's body, coursing violently like an unstoppable tide. This immense energy continued to grow at an astonishing rate. Within Lindong's body, 3 ancestral talismans formed a triangular formation, standing apart but faintly opposing each other. At the center, the ancestral stone hovered quietly, its gentle power dissolving the resistance between the talismans. Among the 3 talismans, the Devouring Ancestral Talisman and Thunder Ancestral Talisman were relatively harmonious, as they had already been refined by Lindong. However, the newly acquired Space Ancestral Talisman resisted fiercely. This resistance, however, was likely not due to its intent, but rather the inherent repulsion between ancestral talismans. For most, possessing even one would be a monumental fortune, but to house multiple talismans within a single body was almost unimaginable. Since ancient times, apart from the ancestral talisman master, no one had successfully integrated all 8 ancestral talismans. Lindong now had 3, and even that posed challenges beyond ordinary comprehension. Lindong maintained a tranquil state of mind, neither forcing the resistance away nor yielding to it. Instead, he allowed his consciousness to immerse itself, sensing the unique power of the Space Ancestral Talisman. To master the Space Ancestral Talisman, one had to fully grasp its essence. Fortunately, with experience in controlling the Devouring and Thunder Talismans, Lindong did not panic. His consciousness delved into the Space Ancestral Talisman, where he could vaguely sense the space around him beginning to ripple, as though the mysterious void itself possessed life. His mind extended beyond his body, merging seamlessly with the surrounding space and then spreading outward like rippling water. Space was omnipresent. As his consciousness intertwined with space, it became an invisible eye, capturing the world in its entirety. Lindong saw the icy barrier enveloping the mountain and the countless Dao Sect disciples gazing toward him. His awareness then drifted farther away through the boundless expanse. 100 miles, 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles, and beyond. Lindong's consciousness expanded infinitely, like a wandering soul traversing dimensions in a manner imperceptible to the ordinary. Initially, he felt resistance within the space he explored, but as he ventured further, that resistance diminished until it disappeared entirely. His consciousness floated endlessly in this vast void. Time seemed to lose meaning during this wandering. Suddenly, Lin Dong noticed his consciousness becoming faint and blurry. Alarmed, he realized his mind had fused too deeply into the void, rendering it impossible to return to his body. In that moment, Lin Dong finally understood the peril of this spatial trial. If his consciousness failed to return, his body would become a lifeless statue, frozen for eternity. A wave of panic surged in his heart, but he quickly forced himself to calm down. Losing composure now would only doom him further. Since this was a trial, there had to be a way to overcome it. Steadying his mind, Lin Dong stopped resisting. Instead, he allowed his consciousness to fully integrate into the space. After a long while, he discovered something remarkable. His consciousness began to rise within the space, as if carried by an invisible current. The ground below grew distant, and the roar of wind filled his ears. Clouds swept across the sky, the brilliant sun faded into the distance, and darkness surged forward like an endless void, causing a sense of dread to well up. Even those at the reincarnation stage would be unable to approach this place. Floating like this, it was hard to tell how long it had been. Suddenly, Lin Dong's mind shook, and he looked back. In the far distance, within that dark void, vast beams of light, each hundreds of thousands of feet long, intertwined and spread out. These beams seemed to form a colossal and eerie formation. The energy emanating from it made even the heavens tremble. Lin Dong focused his mind on the massive formation and saw a gigantic black crack, roughly 100,000 feet wide, writhing like a demonic dragon. Beyond it lay an endless darkness, like the land of demons. A terrifying evil aura continuously surged from within, but it was held back by the formation. Lin Dong's mind trembled as he gazed at the black crack. Could this be the legendary dimensional rift? And beyond it, is that where the alien demons come from? At this moment, Lin Dong's heart shook violently. Just one glance at that rift almost caused him to lose control. The evil within seemed to pull him into an endless abyss. If this rift truly is a dimensional rift, then this massive formation, hundreds of thousands of feet wide, must have been left by the revered ancestral Talisman master. Only someone of such power could set up a world-destroying formation to seal an entire dimension. Ancestral Talisman master, Lin Dong murmured to himself. His mind remained fixed on the formation, feeling the immense energy within it. He could sense that even a peak expert who had undergone 2 reincarnation tribulations would be obliterated instantly by just a trace of its power. Such power was awe-inspiring, beyond comprehension. While Lin Dong was still shaken by the terrifying strength of the formation, he suddenly realized that his consciousness was being drawn toward it, slowly but irresistibly. This discovery nearly made him break into a cold sweat. This place, both the super formation and the dimensional rift, was far beyond his current ability to withstand. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't resist the pull. He could only helplessly watch as his mind drifted closer and closer to the formation. As he drew near, the oppressive power radiating from the formation caused his consciousness to tremble, as if it might shatter entirely. It felt like his very soul was about to dissipate. However, as Lin Dong approached, it seemed the formation reacted. A faint glow spread outward, and a shadow, almost obscuring the entire sky, faintly formed above it. The shadow was hard to make out, but it emanated a presence that dwarfed the heavens. Was that the ancestral Talisman master? The shadow appeared to have only half a body, but it bent down as if the entire world was beneath it. Then, it slowly extended a giant hand, its finger piercing through the void, pointing directly at Lin Dong. Under this attack, Lin Dong had no chance of avoiding it. In the next moment, the finger landed on his body. Boom! With the touch of a finger, his mind nearly shattered in an instant. He felt the darkness retreating rapidly, the sun and moon reappearing, clouds floating, and his consciousness rapidly plummeting. Whoosh! Whoosh! The fall seemed to last for a long time. But then Lin Dong suddenly opened his eyes, a look of horror spreading across his face. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, quickly soaking his entire body. "Am I back?" he whispered, trembling as he extended his hand and clenched it. Through the ice barrier, he could see the bustling scene of the Dao Sect, with countless disciples of the sect moving about. What he had experienced felt like a world apart, as though it were the boundary between life and death. Lin Dong looked up, his heart still pounding. In the distant sky, beyond his reach, was the super formation created by the ancestral Talisman master, along with that terrifying dimensional rift. Even those at the reincarnation stage couldn't approach that place, yet he had glimpsed it with the space ancestral talisman. But that feeling was too terrifying. In that brief moment, Lin Dong had almost felt his soul being torn apart. If that shadow had any murderous intent toward him, he would have already been utterly destroyed. Lin Dong wiped the cold sweat from his brow. Suddenly, his hand froze mid-air. Looking at his palm, he saw a faint silver glow emanating from it. This change left him momentarily stunned. Then, he looked at his body, which was also radiating silver light. He gently closed his eyes, feeling as if the surrounding space had fused with him. With just a thought, he could appear in a space thousands of miles away. Is this the space ancestral talisman under my control? This strange sensation startled Lin Dong, and soon, his eyes filled with ecstatic joy. Only someone who had mastered the space ancestral talisman could merge so perfectly with space. Lin Dong quickly closed his eyes again. He then sensed that inside his body, the space ancestral talisman was silently floating, forming a triangular arrangement with the devouring ancestral talisman and thunder ancestral talisman. However, the earlier resistance had completely dissipated. Buzz. As Lin Dong gazed in wild delight at the still space ancestral talisman, it suddenly trembled. Then, Lin Dong noticed that with the vibration of the space ancestral talisman, the vast primordial energy within his body began to gather at an astonishing speed, like a tidal wave rising. As the primordial energy surged, a strange transformation began to occur within it. It seemed like a change that occurred when a power reached its peak. The primordial energy rippled like an ocean within Lin Dong's body, and at the very bottom of this ocean, peculiar fluctuations quietly began to form. A profound, indescribable sensation blossomed. It was the wave of reincarnation. Joy surged in Lin Dong's eyes as he realized that he was about to step past the barrier that had hindered countless powerful cultivators throughout their lives. One step away, and it would be reincarnation. Time passed swiftly, and 2 months unknowingly went by. During these 2 months, the ice dome atop the mountain had never dissipated. Everyone could only vaguely see the emaciated figure within. Yet, with the passage of time, even ordinary disciples of the Dao Sect could feel that a terrifying wave of primordial energy was slowly gathering within the ice dome. Above the Dao Sect, thick clouds swirled. These clouds were formed by an immense concentration of primordial energy, and the level of energy gathered had reached a terrifying extreme. The pressure of this energy was so overwhelming that even a super-strong practitioner at the revolution stage would tremble in fear. On the main peak of the Dao Sect, EngSubs and the others also looked up at the sky, their eyes filled with awe. Though he, too, was now a practitioner on the verge of reincarnation, that final step had remained elusive. It wasn't just a lack of comprehension of reincarnation. His primordial energy hadn't yet reached that almost monstrous level. Without enough primordial energy, it was impossible to cultivate the concept of reincarnation. Well, judging by the way things are going, it should be soon, right? EngSubs murmured. He could sense that the primordial energy gathering in the sky was nearing its limit. If it continued to accumulate, it might collapse the very heavens and earth. Boom. Not long after his words fell, a strange sound echoed from the sky. Countless Dao Sect disciples looked up in astonishment, only to see the vast primordial energy clouds stretching over thousands of miles slowly twisting. Strange beams of light pierced through the clouds, casting down upon the earth. Anyone touched by the light appeared somewhat dazed, and their primordial energy subtly expanded. Reincarnation light? On a nearby mountain peak, the Flame Lord's gaze sharpened as he watched the light beams. Then, he turned his attention to the mountain peak surrounded by the ice dome. Lin Dong had finally taken that step. Stepping into the reincarnation stage, that's enough to qualify him for the top-tier level. The Flame Lord muttered to himself, but then his brow furrowed. He gently pressed his hand to his chest, a dark look passing through his eyes. These guys have finally made their move. Boom. The speed at which the primordial energy clouds churned grew faster and faster. In the next instant, a deafening sound rang out as the clouds were forcefully torn apart. A massive primordial energy torrent, 1,000 feet tall, came crashing down. The torrent of energy cascaded from the sky like a waterfall, bringing with it an earth-shattering momentum. It finally fell onto the ice dome, under the shocked gazes of countless onlookers. Crack! The incredibly sturdy ice dome instantly shattered, ice fragments flying everywhere. Near the scene, Qingtan's expression changed slightly when she saw the ice dome break. Her delicate hand clenched, and dark light began to flow around her. However, just as she was about to act, a cold jade hand grasped hers, stopping her. This is something he must go through to break into the reincarnation stage. No one can help him, or it will only be detrimental to him, Huan said. Upon hearing this, Qingtan bit her lip and looked anxiously at the mountain peak. The ice shield shattered, and countless gazes turned towards the scene. On the mountain peak, the thin figure that had been sitting cross-legged stood up. He looked at the descending waterfall of primordial energy, his face showing no fear, but instead, a fervent excitement swirling in his black eyes. Lin Dong's body trembled slightly, and a massive black hole suddenly appeared above his head. The primordial energy waterfall came crashing down, plunging violently into the black hole. The impact was so fierce that even the black hole shook violently. Lin Dong staggered back a step, feeling as though his internal organs were being displaced by the force. However, at this moment he understood. There could be no retreat. The black hole's rotation accelerated dramatically, and its devouring power reached its peak, greedily absorbing the terrifying primordial energy, which was then funneled into Lin Dong's body. As the vast primordial energy flowed into him, Lin Dong's skin writhed with countless strands of energy, like serpents moving under his skin, giving him a frightening appearance. The primordial energy waterfall, one end connecting to the clouds and sea of the sky, the other plunging into the black hole below, resembled a colossal dragon between heaven and earth. It was truly a magnificent sight. However, it was clear that advancing into the reincarnation stage was not so simple. Not long after the first waterfall of primordial energy fell, the energy clouds above began to churn once more. To everyone's astonishment, 10 more waterfalls of primordial energy roared down from the clouds like white dragons, claws outstretched, charging towards Lin Dong. At the sight of this, EngSubs and the others' expressions changed, and Qingtan clenched her small hands in anxiety. Huan, beside her, also fixed her icy blue eyes on the figure atop the mountain. Lin Dong noticed the change as well. His pupils contracted slightly, and a fierce glint flashed in his eyes. If he couldn't even overcome this hurdle, how could he ever hope to surpass the ancient lords? Devouring ancestral talisman. A deep shout suddenly erupted from Lin Dong. At that moment, a pure black ray of light shot out from the top of his head. The black light quickly condensed into a massive, ancient black symbol above him. The symbol slowly wriggled, and an incredibly powerful devouring force erupted from it. Under this force, everyone could feel the primordial energy inside them beginning to surge uncontrollably. Is that the devouring ancestral talisman? EngSubs and the others were shocked as they gazed at the mysterious black ancient symbol. Was this really the legendary devouring ancestral talisman? The symbol continued to wriggle rapidly, and then it swiftly transformed into a black shadow. The figure resembled Lin Dong, but its eyes were like black holes, deep and unfathomable. Roar! The black shadow let out a mighty roar, and an overwhelming devouring force exploded from its mouth. The sky above twisted as it was sucked in. The 10 waterfalls of primordial energy were drawn in, crashing down towards the shadow's mouth with thunderous force. As the terrifying devouring power took hold, Lin Dong's body atop the mountain trembled, and deep explosive sounds echoed from within him. To everyone's amazement, his body began to expand at an astonishing rate. In just a few breaths, Lin Dong had transformed into a 100-foot giant, with primordial energy coursing through his body like enraged serpents. Boom! Lin Dong's arm, swollen to its limit, suddenly exploded, sending blood and flesh flying. Countless Dao Sect disciples cried out in horror. Had he failed? With anxious eyes, they watched as, beneath the exploded arm, a jade-like bone glimmered with an eerie light. Within the bone, the sound of dragon roars seemed to echo. Power surged, and the flesh rapidly began regenerating. Though Lin Dong's body continued to explode in places, blood and flesh flying, sending shivers down everyone's spines. But no matter how much his body exploded under the pressure of the primordial energy, as long as his bones and organs remained intact, the flesh would regenerate quickly. With the power of Lin Dong's primordial dragon bones, even though the primordial energy infusion was terrifying, it was nearly impossible to destroy his bones. Bang! 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 Everyone's hearts raced as the explosive sounds of his flesh reverberated from the mountaintop. Thick blood mist began to envelop the peak, obscuring the view. This explosion continued from noon until dusk, gradually weakening. Everyone gazed up, unable to see through the dense blood mist. No one knew if Lin Dong had survived the terrifying primordial energy infusion. In the sky, the final waterfall of primordial energy was devoured by the shadow created by the devouring ancestral talisman. The shadow trembled violently before turning into a beam of black light and vanishing into the blood mist. As the shadow dashed into the blood mist, a deep dragon's roar suddenly echoed from within the fog. The pressure contained in that roar caused countless people to shudder uncontrollably. Brilliant purple-gold light abruptly tore through the blood mist, soaring into the sky. In the next moment, it transformed into a massive purple-gold dragon. The dragon opened its mouth wide, devouring the dense blood mist, swallowing it all before letting out a mighty roar. The earth-shaking dragon's cry spread across the sky, and the primordial energy clouds above began to howl down toward the ground, only to be consumed by the purple-gold dragon. Once again, warm sunlight poured down from the heavens, and the terrifying pressure of primordial energy gradually dissipated. Yet, every eye remained fixed on the purple-gold dragon. There, a brilliant light burst forth as the dragon began to shrink and twist, ultimately transforming back into a slender figure under the gaze of all. The figure, dressed in black, with black hair gently waving in the wind, had a youthful face glowing with a faint purple-gold radiance. An indescribable aura of authority radiated from him. His jet-black eyes, deep as the night sky, were mesmerizing. Standing in midair, his long hands slowly clenched into fists. Then, he suddenly threw his head back and let out a long, clear howl. A 1,000-foot beam of light shot up from his body, eventually transforming into a massive, radiant disk high in the sky. The disk spun gently, timeless and endless, like the cycle of reincarnation. The reincarnation disk, as they gazed at the enormous light disk, a look of astonishment appeared in the eyes of EngSubs and the others. When the disk appeared, they immediately knew that Lin Dong had truly entered the reincarnation stage. Up in the sky, Lin Dong's gaze remained fixed on the disk, and a hint of excitement appeared at the corner of his lips.